13 years later, it just sold for $850 million.
Yeah.
So you created a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly.
If we round up a little
bit. Yeah. Well, I think it was worth more than that when I left. So
okay.
I can say.
Yeah. Do you regret selling it? Do you like look at that and say, or is it like you can't think that way? Like, apples and oranges.
I would say still to this day, I can't decide whether I regret it or not.
Welcome to Triangle Tweener Talks, a weekly podcast by builders for builders where we explore the startup journey from the idea to the exit and all the lessons in between with an exclusive focus on founders from the Triangle region of North Carolina. Tweener Talks is produced by Earfluence. Now here's your host, serial founder and general partner of the Triangle Tweener Fund, Scott Wingo.
This is a conversation with serial founder and Triangle icon, Jess Lipson. Jess is currently the CEO and founder of Levitate. Levitate's a software company that helps small businesses manage their relationships in an authentic way. He'll tell you more about that. Jess previously founded ShareFile, also Raleigh Founded, which is the co-working facility we're in right now, and he has had a huge help in growing the Triangle startup ecosystem. Before we get into the conversation, I want to thank the Earfluence team, Jason, Carson, and CC. They help produce this podcast, and it wouldn't be possible without them. If you have any podcasting needs, definitely give them a shout. They're at earfluence.com, and more details in the show notes. As a full disclosure, the Triangle Tweener Fund, where I'm a general partner, is an investor in Levitate. And here is my conversation with Jess Lipson. Jess, thanks for doing this. Excited to have you on the Triangle Tweener Talks podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I've known you forever. But what's fun about this is I get to ask you questions I don't know the answers to. Mm-hmm. So let's start at the beginning. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Iowa. I was born in Iowa City, lived there till I was 8. And then my parents moved to Baltimore. My mom was a journalist, and she was a journalist in Iowa, a small newspaper in Iowa, and she was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, got an offer for the Baltimore Sun. That moved us there. I was there till I was 18, graduated high school, and then I came down to North Carolina for college. I went to Duke, and I've been here ever since.
Cool. What did you study at Duke?
I was a philosophy major. So I actually came into college wanting to be a physics major. I was a big physics person in high school. And that was my intention going to Duke. But then by the time I got there, kind of like looking through the course book, I was just fascinated by the philosophy classes. And a lot of what I liked about physics was kind of modern physics, which kind of crosses into philosophy. So I ended up actually deciding to be a philosophy major my freshman year and never changed.
You're one of the only founders I know that has a philosophy degree, which is interesting because you're also like a very deep thinker. And, of all the founders I know, you're always looking very far out, but then also like very narrow. It's like, is that part of the philosophy thing gives you that ability to look across these time spans?
Yeah. I mean, there's a decent number of people in tech that are philosophy. You have like Peter Thiel, I believe was a philosophy major, Reid Hoffman. I think there's a decent amount of crossover between philosophy and computer science. And part of it is probably, I think in philosophy, I actually took, 2 or 3 logic courses, like propositional logic, predicate logic. I did one course where we spent like 2 months proving Gödel's incompleteness theorem through like logic symbols and stuff. And then even ancient philosophy, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, there's a strong logic element to all the arguments. And so I think just like critical thinking, critical reading, logic, there's a pretty strong crossover between, I would say, technology and philosophy. I don't know if that's why I became an entrepreneur or interested in technology, but for a long time in like my early days, I would get the question, how's your philosophy major affected being an entrepreneur? Yeah. And I think for a long time, I just felt like it really didn't. But I do think that like, kind of think a philosophy major would say like correlation versus causation, maybe the same attributes that made me want to be a philosophy major, make me an entrepreneur, kind of thinking from first principles, I think is something that I've always done. I jumped into entrepreneurship very early. And so I didn't really have experience. I was just inventing things from first principles. And a lot of times that was I realized why people do things the way they do. Cause
physics and philosophy share that, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, it's like first principle thinking. Engineering has a lot of that too. So there's a core there.
Yeah, exactly. And so I did a lot. And I think part of being an entrepreneur, I guess, is like you trust your first principle thinking to some extent over kind of conventional wisdom. And in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to basically be contrarian to what everyone else in the market is doing. Otherwise, the opportunity wouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. And so I think trusting like first principles over whatever kind of the conventional wisdom is probably something that, helps you be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, we're either genius contrarians or foolish naives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think they say like, one of the keys to a successful business is being contrarian and right, So, being contrarian is a starting point, and then oftentimes you're not right, but you have to be contrarian pretty much to even get in the game.
Yeah, and we'll get into it, but it's funny, like, so you build businesses people think can't be built, and people always ask me like, will it work? I'm like, well, it's working. Mm-hmm. And then they like ask me how, and I'm like, I don't know how he's doing it. Yeah. so we can get into that. When did you first like get this inkling you wanted to do entrepreneurship? Was it when you were at Duke or a little bit later?
It was at Duke. So I was in school. I went to Duke in 1996. So I was kind of in school during the dot-com boom that was happening in like 98, 99. And it was hard not to get caught up, I would say, in the dot-com boom that was happening at that time. It felt like everybody had a startup idea, and like, you lived through it as well. Like idea to IPO in 12 months. And I mean, there were companies going, I think maybe even Netscape was like 4 million of revenue when they IPO'd.
Yeah.
And there was just such an energy around it. And I was in school at the right time. I had a little bit of exposure to internet and took a couple computer science classes. And so I basically came up with a startup idea in the fall of my senior year. I was living with a group of guys who, two of them were computer science majors. And so we all kind of like, hey, here's the idea. We all worked on it together. And it was a great experience just getting exposed to tech and getting exposed to entrepreneurship. Then,
so you're doing a little coding?
I wasn't doing coding at that time.
Okay.
My other two roommates were, and me and my other roommate were doing more of the business side. Mm-hmm. And then I actually graduated a semester early, but then stuck around. And then March of 2000 was the dot-com bust. So we kind of never did anything with the idea post-graduation.
Rip good times. That was like,
exactly.
Yeah, I remember Fortune magazine came out.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, this is not good.
I mean, we would have failed anyway because we were so naive about startups. But
what was the idea?
The idea was called Easy Central. And the original idea was actually kind of a password manager, essentially. Mm-hmm. So back in the late 90s, especially in college, people were on multiple computers. Like you'd go to the computer lab, you go to your desktop computer in your dorm. You'd go to people go to internet cafes. And so my idea was like some kind of profile that could travel around with you, where I could log into all my sites and kind of have a personalized experience. And we basically created like a browser toolbar to do it. And then the idea evolved a little bit. So it was actually not a bad idea as I look back, because I was way before any of the password managers. Yeah. But we just weren't.
NC State had one, and it was like from MIT, and it was like, it would take like 30 minutes for it to like pull down your whatever it was.
Yeah.
So you'd log in and like you'd just like go do something for 20 minutes, and then finally it was like not what we're used to today.
The internet boom was developing while I was there. Like when I was a freshman, I would telnet into my email, and it was basically like command line stuff. And then I think when I was a sophomore, junior, Hotmail came out, which was just incredible. And so you started to see a lot more websites developing. So I kind of got caught up in the energy of that. .com crash happened, and then I essentially I officially had graduated, but effectively I graduated a couple months later in May. And I wanted to stay around the area. Like my girlfriend at the time, Brooks, who's now my wife, she was 2 years younger than me. And so I looked around for jobs in the area, and had the CED directory, which was like physical directory, just all calling startups. Yeah. And one of them saw my experience and hired me as like kind of lowest entry-level employee. There were 2 founders that were full-time at the time. And I came on this company called WeShare, which was got named to Full 7, and basically continued in the entrepreneurship world. And so basically, while I was there, one of the assignments they gave me was to find a vendor to build our website and then learn how to do the updates. And so I kind of did some Googling. I learned how to do Flash, and I learned how to do, website updates. And I was like, I could have built this website, and for like $5,000 or $6,000 that we paid the vendor, I could live for like 6 months on $5,000 or $6,000. And so that kind of got me into coding, and I just started to get deeper and deeper into learning just through Google searches and stuff, how to build websites and database-driven applications and things like that.
Yeah. And Full 7 did a dynamic email signature.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is like a deep cut.
Yeah, exactly.
And was one of the Rua, was this Rua, the name Rua?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Don Rua.
Dan Rua's brother. Don.
Yeah.
Whoa,
and their dad.
Those
are the co-founders.
Yeah. Okay, wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I actually created the Full 7 was basically email signature management. Mm-hmm. And I actually, despite not being a programmer, came up with the idea of doing these like what were called server-side includes, to be able to change out the image, but then change out all the links to the image on the server side.
Because if you had a trade show coming up or something, you want your signature to reflect that.
Exactly.
Then after you want it to flip back.
Exactly. Yeah. And so with the server-side includes, you could change the image at any time, and then also put hotspots on the image of like different links. And so, I think email signature management is still like a reasonably decent idea.
It's kind of weird we haven't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why doesn't Gmail do that?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
so easy.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Today, but
So that was, I worked on that for a little bit less than a year before I left to start my own business.
Yeah. And then how did you meet Brooks? I actually don't know this story.
We met, Brooks is in the marching band at Duke. And after the Duke UNC game in January of 1999, when Duke beat UNC, like Duke would take all the benches on campus and put them into a huge pile and then do a big bonfire. And so I basically met her outside like the bonfire when she was coming back from the Duke UNC game.
Very romantic.
25, almost 26 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't get too close. And then Brooks was an intern for me.
She was.
I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah,
so
I
auction
remember
rover.
that.
And I met her, and within like 30 seconds, I knew I needed to hire her because at that point in time, not a lot of people in the Triangle knew about internet stuff. And I was like, we're going to do this thing called an affiliate program. She's like, I've run 12 affiliate programs. I've done this, that, or the other. And I'm like, where did this person come from that knows so much about, like at that point, it was just like this, whoa, where are you from? And then I felt bad because we could never like keep her busy enough. So she was just like chew through all the work we would give her. And then she definitely, I forget the timeline, but that's when I first met you, is she was like, my boyfriend's working on this thing.
Yeah.
That ultimately, I don't know when you started, but it's what became ShareFile.
Yeah.
So tell us the origin story of ShareFile.
Yeah. So I think maybe I met you even before that. I think I was probably working on some other startup ideas.
I think you came to the Auction Rover launch party. Yeah. I kind of remember that.
And I remember Auction Rover, like Brooks was so committed to it, would go to like a concert or something, and she would bring her Auction Rover business cards to put on all the cars in the parking lot and stuff like that.
That was our girl in marketing.
Yeah. And then she was an intern at Red Hat. That was still like when Red Hat was relatively early. Yeah. I do remember you agreeing to meet with me, which was awesome because I was just starting out in entrepreneurship. So the way ShareFile started, I created this website company, and Brooks was working with me on it. She was still in college.
Was this kind of like because you realized at Full 7 you could do this, and you're like,
yeah,
I'll just do this myself.
I kind of decided I wanted to do my own business. I was kind of jaded by the whole venture capital world after seeing the .com bubble. And, frankly, at Full 7, it was still the .com era. The bust had happened, but I just saw this case where we were so focused on just doing whatever we needed to do to raise funding versus focusing on building and getting customers. At that time, I just really did not understand why you needed VC. If you could code, I was like, hey, if I can learn to code, I can just build my idea and like not worry about trying to spend all my time and energy raising VC. So the easiest way to get started was a services business. So started this web development company. Brooks and I worked together. We just build custom websites, custom web apps, and we did that for a few years.
Your relationship survived working together. That's always
That's
always a tricky one.
Yeah, we were together like 24 hours a day. Eventually, I think we realized that it would be better for us to have separate companies. But one of our big clients in the early days was AOL, and that quickly became 80% of our revenue. I really decided I wanted to work on software products. And so I would usually like be working, 10, 12 hours a day in the office on client projects. Then I would come home and I would work another 3 or 4 hours on my own coding projects, just fun things that I wanted to build. And so I had developed a few different product ideas. One of them was a digital asset management solution that we were actually licensing to AOL. I developed a content management system. I had actually created some intellectual property around cryptography. I got a patent for it. I basically figured out a way to significantly speed up effectively SSL encryption and decryption.
Cool.
And so I thought about doing something with that.
This is a weird sidebar. I watched the Satoshi documentary last night, and I'm not sure if I believe it or not, but it was entertaining. There's these dudes in Chapel Hill I met, and they were super weird. They were like behind Rosemary Street in a strip mall, and they were working on what became PGP. And I don't know, I can't remember their names or why they were here, and I don't remember why I met them. Did you ever meet them?
No.
Okay.
I did not.
I'm pretty sure one of them was like one of the cypher punks they talk about. It's a guy with like a big beard. I think he was here for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I became pretty obsessed with public key cryptography at that time, and just like thinking about the idea that like a check is such an insecure thing. You basically give someone your routing number and account number, and like there's all these, and PGP was along those lines, just like all the applications of public key cryptography that just should exist.
Did you run across any of the early Bitcoin stuff like Hashcash and eGold and
I think stuff? I was pre-Bitcoin. This was like I was doing this stuff in like 2003-ish.
Yeah, that's pretty early.
Yeah, and so, but basically, it kind of ties into ShareFile because the precursor to ShareFile for me was I had this idea coming out of cryptography for a product that I called SecureNet, which essentially the idea was like, PGP is like a little bit too complicated for people. So creating some kind of a secure messaging layer that would allow people in a group to share files or messages or whatever. So like one of the problems I had to solve was that in public key cryptography, if you had a group of people, it wasn't designed for that. It was designed for like sending from one to one. Yeah. And so basically I figured out a way to do it. And I was thinking about this as a product idea, but I did a focus group and basically realized that people didn't care nearly as much about security as I thought they did. And like,
now everyone posts their breakfast on every social media network and don't care anything.
And then basically like the details, the mathematics of cryptography, people don't understand. And so like, if you really want to help people transfer files, they're perfectly happy to just trust that your company will like, even though your company has access to the files, that's fine as long as you're like a trustworthy company.
Yeah.
So I kind of pivoted away from this like hardcore secure net type thing to something like ShareFile, which was a problem that I saw a lot of my website customers having, which is they wanted to create a client portal where they could have a custom branded login. Clients could come in, and usually they were coming in to either grab, have folders with files in them or see notes or links.
And back then you had FTP, right?
Exactly.
And you and I understood it, but like, Aunt Jenny's not going to understand FTP.
Exactly.
Like, at some point you're like basically at a command line.
Yeah.
It's like totally useless.
And FTP, what I saw with FTP was like, it's a hardcore tech protocol. And at the time, web applications were coming out. And so you had all these nice features, like if you forget your password, if it's a web app, you can reset it. If it's FTP, you're just screwed. Like you have to call the server admin and have them reset your password. And like FTP, if you're in the middle of uploading a big file and it fails, then you have to start all the way over. That's just like the way the protocol is. And so kind of those two ideas came together of like bringing some of the nice features of web applications to FTP and also having a custom branded client portal was something that was a common use case for my SMB customers. So I just decided to build it.
Cool. And this is like,
this was 2005.
05. Yeah. And this is like just, it's easy now to not realize this, but this is before Dropbox, Box, G Drive, OneDrive, before any of that existed.
Yeah.
Or was it even an inkling? This is way before cloud computing.
Yeah. So there were ideas. So like there was a company in the .com bubble. There were a couple of companies in the .com bubble era. One was called XDrive. It was a file transfer. It was acquired by AOL. There was another one called Streamload. So there was actually like a generation of this stuff that happened in 2000. And so when I had the idea for ShareFile and I told people that a lot of like people that were like VC types were like, isn't that like a old, kind of .com idea? Like, why would you do this? It's already been done. And like the companies that are doing it now are not like super successful. There was a company that came out like right before us, a year maybe before us, called You Send It.
I remember that.
And then Box came out around the same time as us. And then Dropbox was like maybe a year or two later.
Yeah.
So kind of like us, Box, and Dropbox in that same era of like 2005 to 2007, we're trying to do some stuff all around the same time.
Yeah. And I think what you do as an entrepreneur is you're very good at finding that customer pain. And this is a common, since I've done the tweener list, it's interesting. Of the 300 companies on the tweener list, a good 100-ish are bootstrapped. And then this one you bootstrapped. And a lot of them do have this pattern where they start with a service business. They see a pattern of some kind, a customer need, and then they flip into a product business. So that's a common way to bootstrap, because you can't get seed funding because you don't want to raise capital. So the service business is the seed.
Yeah,
maybe even
exactly.
Seed into the product.
Yeah, exactly.
When did you turn the service off, or just spin that out, or like what?
We spun it out. So we created, the original company was called Novel Projects, and then we split it into three. We kept Novel Projects, which is website design. Brooks spun out the AOL business into Brooks Bell. And then I spun out the product in what I called Novel Labs. And so ShareFile, a couple years in, like that was 2003. A couple years in was when I had those 3 or 4 different ideas. And a couple years in, I decided to focus on the ShareFile concept.
Yeah. So it's 05. You've kind of focused in on ShareFile. Give us kind of the sequence of things that happened then.
Yeah. So I built the original version along with a guy who was running the Novel Projects business. We spent 3 months together kind of getting MVP going for ShareFile. And then I opened up a Google AdWords account. This was kind of like golden age of Google AdWords. And I put $100 into it. I decided I was going to spend 2 years with no salary and just reinvest whatever revenues I could make back in ShareFile. So like first month I got 4 free trial, or no, I think I got more than 4 free trials, maybe 20 free trials and 4 paid customers.
Did you have like a freemium, like X days free?
Yeah, we had a 30-day free
month,
trial.
or like,
yeah, exactly. It was like a 30-day free trial, $20 a month was kind of where we started.
Unlimited files, or did it like tier up with some usage?
It had limits, yeah, because back then, this was pre-AWS. So we were paying $3 a gigabyte for data transfer.
Probably on servers.
Hosted solutions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we became beta customers of AWS actually in 2000, I think it was 7. So I got, 4 customers. And so like that was $80 or something like that. Then I reinvested the $100 budget plus the 80 and just kind of compounded the Google ad spend. And then, by just compounding and putting that on my credit card, within 2 or 3 years, I was spending like $300,000 a month on Google AdWords. And so all the initial scaling the first few years was Google AdWords and just optimizing conversion process and going from there.
Yeah. And I think I heard you tell the story where you put it all in an Amex. So then you get all And at one point they like came and presented you with like the ultimate top Amex thing and all this stuff, because you're like running so much through that.
Exactly. Yeah, they didn't ask any questions until we were spending about $100,000 a month.
Yeah, this is your account rep.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are you and what are you doing?
Yeah, because we always paid it off, so they just kept us letting us spend more and more. But actually, like the 30 days that I had to pay it off, in the early days, our customer acquisition cost was so good because Google AdWords was so cheap that became a form of financing we could put $20,000 in, and oftentimes we could get a lot of it paid back because our 30-day trial would end. So at the time the credit card bill was due, and so like by the time the credit card bill was due, I could basically pay the credit card bill with the what I charge people when the 30-day trial expired.
Cash flow management on an Amex card.
Yeah.
It always works good until they cancel.
Yeah.
I've had that happen before. Yeah. They're like, we want to see your books. I'm like, I don't think you're going to like what you see.
I was actually shocked they let me go as long as they did, because if in a given month I just ghosted, they would have been out, $100,000.
Yeah. So I always tell people what you're really good at is finding these kind of super horizontal solutions, but then getting really vertical at them. At what point in ShareFile did you kind of like start doing the verticalization piece?
It was a few years in. So we started horizontal, but we always would, every single customer that came in, we classified their industry. So I knew what the distribution was by industry. Mm-hmm. And eventually we got a little bit worried about Google AdWords as our only channel, because one of the challenges with Google AdWords is that actually the more you want to spend, the worse the efficiency is, because you have to bid for higher positions.
Out of supply too. Yeah, like there's only so many people searching.
Exactly, it's limited supply, and you have to pay more to get more volume, because it's like, if we're bidding for the number 3 position, then it's cost us 3 times as much to be number 1 position, and that's what we need if we want to get more volume. We have to make our acquisition costs like 2 or 3 times as bad. Yeah. And so we decided to add more of a sales channel. It's tough when you bring a sales team into the picture to just be like, call the phone book, like you need to have some level of focus. And so that's when we started verticalizing, and we picked accounting as our first industry. So our sales team was always fully verticalized, focused on one industry, and then we kept expanding. And then our online marketing was more horizontal, because it's tougher to do online marketing vertical.
Yeah, and this is where you break conventional wisdom, because this is what makes VCs' heads explode, right? Mm-hmm. Because the conventional wisdom is you can't have an outbound sales team unless you have what we'd call an ACV, or we used to call it ARPU, now we call it ACV. You can't do that without an annual contract value. Everyone has a number. Usually it's like 10K or 20K, mm-hmm. And you're here at $20 a month doing it.
Yeah.
So how do you break that conventional wisdom?
Yeah, and for the one thing we had to do with the sales team is like, we wouldn't sell the $20 plan. We'd always sell the ShareFile for accountants, which was still only like $60 a month to $100 a month, way below what anyone would consider possible. I think part of it is, I don't actually think at that ACV we could make it work today, because this was like post-financial crisis. Mm-hmm. And so the labor market was different, obviously, and the equivalent of $1,000 ACV today with inflation, is probably 2,000. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things that I exploited was the fact that VC-backed companies weren't doing what we were doing because VCs thought it was impossible. Mm-hmm. And so then that creates an opportunity if you're able to.
You had a green space. No one was going after this tier.
Yeah. So kind of like the difficulty of solving that problem becomes a moat if you can do it. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason we were able to be successful is I realized that the process of doing outbound telesales is actually I basically turned it into an engineering problem, just like online advertising, which is, it's very quantifiable, and you can test and optimize. We took every call that we made and we broke it into 5 separate segments, measured each segment's conversion rate, and tested and optimized getting that to where it needed to be.
Accounting, legal.
No, a segment of like the segment of a call itself.
Oh, okay.
The interaction with the gatekeeper, the hook that you do.
Wow.
Asking for the time.
You're way deeper than us.
Quick questions. Yeah. And so, but basically you think about metrics like, okay, well, how many dials does it take to book a demo? What's the show rate on the demo? What's the close rate on the demo? So effectively you can figure out what's the cost to perform a demo through that channel, and what's the conversion rate. And so you can come up with a very quantifiable acquisition cost. And then, okay, well, how many dials does somebody make per day? And figure out what math is required to get a payback period of less than a year. And then with our model thinking, okay, well, if we can get a payback period of this, it works and it scales. And so it kind of gets back to the first principle thinking, which is I don't care what VCs say. If like my payback model shows that this works, then we should do it. And then we relentlessly tested and optimized all of those metrics along the chain and got it to like a 10-month payback. And so even if it was a $60 a month service, if we're able to get that kind of a payback period, we feel good about, acquiring customers that way.
Yeah. And what's cool is when you build a system like that, now you have all this data. Now you can even like go further in the chain, right? So you start to see, you hire 10 reps and some of them outperform, and you try to understand what it is that cohort. So we would do that at Channel Advisor, and one time we got this really strong signal that it was college athletes. Mm-hmm. So we just like poured into hiring college athletes. It didn't have to be like football players, but and it usually skewed heavy female for us too. Mm. So it was interesting. And then like you would do that and like you would see all the numbers come, it was really interesting. Like now you can like get the whole full closed loop type of a system.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That systems thinking, like where's that come from? Like that, I don't think they taught you that in philosophy.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it's just, for me, very natural to be data driven. And it's actually part of the reason why I like SMB, because SMB, you have the law of large numbers, and basically you're essentially looking at analytics. You can run the business through analytics because you have thousands of customers, you have thousands of demos that you perform every month. Enterprise is more kind of lumpy, artsy. We made the quarter because this thing happened or didn't happen. Yeah. And
you're like one shade away from consumer in SMB.
Yeah, and so I was always drawn to that because I think it gives you the ability to like test and optimize, and I've always enjoyed it. And actually, the work that we did back in the early novel projects and Brooks Bell days with AOL was a lot about testing and optimizing, and trying different psychology and approaches, and then seeing what works, and kind of running a flywheel that way. And so I think I've always been good at it. It's kind of like how I naturally think about everything is probably from some kind of a Excel model kind of type approach.
I don't know between you and Brooks where this is, but she's like one of the top people probably in the world, if not certainly the country, around like understanding testing and how to like do that right and harness it, and not A/B testing, but like multivariate, like out into infinity type testing. So, so I'm sure like you have to kind of sprinkle a lot of that in there too.
Yeah. She's very, very much has this intuitive sense of when there's bad usability in a process or something is off, and like what, how to design a workflow or a path that's going to convert at a high rate, just intuitively. Like, whereas I'm more come up with the model and like to measure and optimize things like that. So like, she'll walk into a hotel and immediately be able to articulate like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Like the lighting is off here. There's 3 fonts on that sign. One of them is this font, one of them is that font.
Yeah. It's hard to turn that off.
Yeah.
Once you see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So ShareFile's chugging. You've got your first vertical. You're figuring out the go-to-market engine. You've kind of gone from just AdWords into a sales engine. Now, do you start opening more verticals, or like how do you start scaling this thing?
Yeah, we did. So we started with accounting, and then we did architecture, engineering, construction, and we just kind of moved through a list of verticals that kind of we were seeing on the online side coming in, but also we felt like they had a logical fit to what we did. And so like one of the ways that we would differentiate ourselves from, say, Dropbox was file sharing in industries where security was more important, security and compliance, and also professionalism, like custom branding with you. It's not our logo on the portal, it's your logo. And then workflows that were more about sharing with external parties. So like Dropbox is more for internal, like I've got my drive of files that follow me everywhere. We were always about what's the workflow if you want to share files with your clients to make it super easy, or request files from your clients and, get signatures on those files and that kind of thing. So we had certain industries where it was a natural fit. So we went into like the financial industry, healthcare, legal, a lot of security and compliance focused, like professional services type industries.
Yeah. And it's, me seeing someone else's tax return is kind of like catastrophic almost, like, so they really care a lot about, you can't just like send even just like a Dropbox link or something like that. You got to like be really careful, and it's not really architected to like the workflow. Yeah. Kind of funny part of this story, you generated so much buzz at ShareFile, like all these inbound VCs that you wouldn't answer them and it would drive them crazy. So they would like come to me and I'm like, I've talked to him. He doesn't want to raise capital and, and they're like, why? And I was like, he just is going to build it without it. And so far he has, and like no one could, you were like Oz in there. Like no one could figure out how the heck you're doing stuff. It was really funny to see the collateral damage from you doing that.
Yeah. No, it was, I kind of, having been burned by the .com thing, and also honestly, like as a first time entrepreneur, with the idea that I had with ShareFile in the early days, I don't think anyone would have funded us. Yeah. And then by the time they were all wanting to fund us, we really didn't need them. Yeah, like there's definitely the year that I sold to Citrix, we were growing 65%, generating 20% profit margin. Yeah, and so like we generated in the year that I sold like a couple $1 million of profit, and so and we were growing fast. So like I didn't feel like I had any use for capital if I was going to raise it at that point.
Yeah. And what was your top line?
The year we sold, we did like 12.5 million of GAAP revenue and like 15 of ARR at the end of that year.
So you started in 05-ish. Yeah. And then when did you sell?
2011. So it was pretty quick, 6 years.
Yeah. 6 years to an exit is awesome. I'm sure you had acquisition offers up until then. Like what about Citrix was interesting to you and why them?
Yeah, it kind of all developed quickly. I think when the financial crisis happened, I basically was like, okay, 2008, 2009, I was like, all right, well, any hopes I have of an acquisition, I need to put on ice for like 5 years because it's going to take a long time for the market to bounce back. And then the interesting thing was a year later, the multiples had actually bounced back by like late 2010. I was really surprised. A couple things happened in like early 2011. One, some of our competitors like Box and Dropbox were starting to raise mega rounds. Like I think Dropbox raised like a $300 or $400 million round. Box raised like 40 million. And so that brought them up to like 80 million of funding.
Which was unheard of.
Yeah, exactly.
Here we are sitting, OpenAI just kind of casually raised like what, 4 billion. Yeah. But hundreds of millions was very strange back then.
Yeah, the Dropbox round was like, I don't know, that was like probably the biggest VC round. Yeah, so all of a sudden file sharing went from being like completely ignored to one of the hottest spaces. And I was worried that even if our competitors were irrational, they could end up, really hurting our business. And it may not be viable for us to be bootstrapped and independent in that environment. And then at the same time, we got a couple small acquisition offers, and then Citrix approached us. And we decided to run a process where basically that's when we actually did bring some VCs into our process to look at the Citrix possible acquisition, but then also we looked at some growth equity funding. At that point, if we did not work something out on Citrix or another acquisition, we probably would have raised a growth round. Yeah. And so it was kind of like the external market, I think, was telling us that it may be hard. In retrospect, I actually think we could have survived it independent. I was probably overly worried about competitive threats there.
Because it seems logical that, okay, Dropbox has got all that money. They can peel off 20 million and come out with vertical and come after us, right? And like you kind of like feel like they are, but they never have. Even today, they haven't.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of weird. Like,
Or even if they just like flooded the search market with irrational bids. Yeah. Like it could be bad for them. It may take them a year or two to figure it out, but in the meantime, it could just crush us.
For the little one,
And so anyway, so that was why, and Citrix came knocking, and we ended up, going through a process with them that ended up taking probably 6+ months, but ended up selling to them.
Yeah. And then going back to the financial crisis, were you guys hit pretty hard by that, or were you relatively immune because you weren't selling to like .coms and lawyers and accountants, many of them survived. Maybe real estate, if you had that vertical, would have gotten creamed, but
we did not feel it. Yeah. Well, and so it's possible we could have grown even faster, but if you looked at our revenue growth chart, you would never know the financial crisis happened at that time. And I think if anything, the tough job market after the financial crisis probably helped us in terms of our outbound sales approach. There was a big pool of people that wanted to work for a really reasonable amount, and they were willing to work really hard.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going through the Citrix thing, and you decide to sell the company. Has the amount been disclosed what that was?
It was $93 million.
93. Nice. Yeah. Okay. How old were you?
I think I was still in my 20s maybe. So that was 2011. No, I was I was 33. I think I turned 34 like 2 weeks later.
Yeah. So having known you for a long arc of time, you haven't changed. I get this a lot too. Like people are like, why haven't you changed? And I'm just like, I don't know. I have no desire to change. I like my lifestyle and who I am and stuff. What was it like to have like such a big win after eating ramen? And, I mean, you were off the ramen train for a while, but
I think it was a tremendous stress relief because you probably have this experience, or at least I know I do, that until you sell your company, there's always an existential fear that something horrible will happen and it will go to zero. Like for ShareFile, I could imagine, what if we screw something up and we lose everyone's files? That's always possible. There's always a way that it can go wrong.
Yeah.
And locking in the acquisition, I think, takes away that stress. And then to some extent, it's like, well, if something bad happens after the acquisition, that's not like fully on me, There's a shared risk. Yeah.
The risk platform gets much higher. In a way, like having nothing is better than having the potential of something that could be lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and so like financially after the acquisition, if that happened, there would be no implications for me because there was no element of the earnout that was on our financial performance. But I think also emotionally, it was like, hey, if somebody acquires your company and then 2 or 3 years later, the company doesn't do well, people are kind of like, well, I guess the acquirer screwed it up.
Yeah.
Versus like that guy screwed it up.
Yeah, and it becomes other people's problems.
Yeah. So it was a tremendous stress relief. The year of the acquisition was the most stressful of my life because the possibility that the acquisition wouldn't happen. And I knew there was such a big financial implication for me and my employees as well to get it over the finish line.
Did you guys have an option plan?
We did. We had a really good size option plan.
Nice.
So like there were several people that made, that became millionaires. And then I think every employee, even ones that had joined like a couple months before, made like at least $10,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a new SDR that joined last month, that can be like, hey, I can buy a car, or if I make $20,000 or $30,000 from this acquisition, I can put a down payment on a house or something like that. And so one of the things that surprised me was even for the employees kind of in the long tail, how impactful it is to be able to have options and, like buying a car, buying a house, that kind of thing is pretty impactful for an employee.
Yeah. I just had a call with a founder. I've become like the founder hotline, and, his board was saying, employees don't care about it and, you don't have to do this. And I was like, well, it's like what, for me, it's the right thing to do. Like, even if the employee doesn't understand, I kind of lean towards like what you did there, which is, if you do have this big event, you want everyone that contributed to have some upside in it. And even, I reject that idea personally. Now, each founder can choose their own path and do their own thing, and it's fine. But congrats, good job doing that.
Yeah.
And you'll find that when you start your next company, those people are very excited to come work for you again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, Levitate. My whole senior team, with the exception of one, is all former ShareFile people.
Yeah. So you sold to Citrix, and that's awesome. And then you bought Citrix to town. So they ended up building, the really cool building they have. That was like a couple years after, right? Yeah.
So we committed to that building. I think it was about a year to a year and a half after the acquisition. So it was we committed to it pretty quick after the acquisition, which surprised me. And then it took another 2 years to actually build it and get it done.
It always takes forever. And
so
they
finished the building 2 months before my 3-year retention package was up, which ended up being a nice way for them to extend my retention because it felt like pretty bad form to leave the company, 2 months after they build you like a $50 million building.
Yeah. And then unlike a lot of, like whenever I've sold a company, I kind of like do my indentured servitude and I'm out of there. And you seem to actually do relatively well there. And they kept tucking more and more stuff underneath your purview. Like why did you do that? And what did you learn in that period?
I had like 3 years that I basically needed to be there, or as a huge financial penalty for me if I left. I had never worked for a big company. Like I had only worked for any company for 11 months in my whole career that wasn't my own startup. And that was, Full 7, which had, when I joined, it was like 2 people and me. And so I kind of went into it with the idea of like, hey, I've never worked for a big company. I might really like it. Maybe I like it better than working at a startup. I don't know. And so they put me in a really good position there where there were two divisions of Citrix when I joined. One was like a $2 billion revenue business. The other was like $500 million. And then they created a third division for ShareFile.
The little $12 billion.
Yeah, exactly. And
little tiny ShareFile.
I reported to the CEO for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And so they gave us a lot of autonomy, and then we basically doubled 3 years in a row. So we went like 12 and a half, 25, 50, 100 million. And we eventually did get kind of combined in, and then we got kind of pulled out. There was a whole thing because we sold, as a company, we sold GoToMeeting. ShareFile got combined into GoToMeeting, and then Citrix decided to sell GoToMeeting and keep ShareFile in. And so it was a good learning experience. I enjoyed it. And eventually I got to the point where I didn't enjoy it as much, and that's when I left. But because we had activist investors in the company for my last couple of years, and so it got to be very different. I did stay a little while to try to make sure ShareFile was in a good position before I left. But I enjoyed it, and it was successful. It was cool to see. It was just sold for $875 million.
Yeah, I was going to, so to tie that off. So 13 years later, it just sold for $850 million.
Yeah.
So you created a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly.
If we round up a little
bit. Yeah. Well, I think it was worth more than that when I left. So I can say.
Yeah. Do you regret selling it? Do you look at that and say, or is it like you can't think that way? Like apples and oranges.
I would say still to this day, I can't decide whether I regret it or not.
At some point, you get kind of burned out on.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for sticking with a company for a long time and compounding. I think that if ShareFile was an independent company, probably we would have built Levitate as one of our, secondary products, and we would have built multiple products probably over time. And I think we probably, could have been, the core business probably still could have been north of 100 million of revenue, even as an independent. But I think that getting kind of the financial security earlier in my career, it's hard to put a value on, on that. And so
once you load up your personal balance sheet, you can take a bigger swing.
Yeah, it takes a lot of pressure off. Yeah. And so I'm happy with the outcome of the acquisition. I think if we continue to run it standalone also, I would have been happy and it would have changed things. And so I still can't decide whether I regret it or not.
Right. It's a problem with having a philosophy major. There's
exactly.
Sometimes there's the journey and not the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's do like a 5-minute piece on Raleigh Founded. So I don't think everyone knows that you were pretty integral in that. Yeah. Tell me the founding story of Raleigh Founded.
Yeah, a couple of things came together. Brooks and I had this idea for something that we called Triangle Founded. Basically, the idea was to have groups of founders who would get together and based on the number of employees they had. So instead of trying to like glorify VC-funded companies, we glorify like job creation and entrepreneurs being able to learn from each other. So like one of the challenges that Triangle has is just geographically spread out, and like there's not enough connectivity between entrepreneurs in the community. And so we wanted to create kind of this social thing called Triangle Founded.
Wasn't there part of this idea, if I recall, like they were going to live together in like a house or something? Or?
That was a separate idea called Think House, which we did.
And you record it and it'd be like real. No,
we did that for 3 or 4 years, Think House. But,
Think House, that was a separate thing.
And actually there was a piece of it that was like what GrepBeat is today. We wanted to create like a tech crunch, have a group of entrepreneurs, just a way for entrepreneurs to have that kind of like collision with each other and exchange of ideas. And then also I had a challenge at ShareFile where like, this was back in 2012 where we created Raleigh Founded. So like WeWork was just still early. It was just in New York, I think, maybe London, but definitely not here. And at ShareFile, for the first 10 years of ShareFile, I think we had to move or expand office spaces like 9 times. And
did you have to personally guarantee some of them?
Never did. I got away without having to do that. But I would have these landlords asking for 5-year leases. And I just think like, how could I possibly know how much space I'm going to need in 5 years? It was just incomprehensible. And then having to buy tens of thousands of dollars of furniture and then wire it with all the internet and just it felt like
then you end up with this trail of subleases that you have to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you're a landlord.
Yeah, exactly. And so it felt like kind of this unnecessary tax on entrepreneurship. And so being an entrepreneur, and you were talking about starting things based on your own pain point, I was like, this would just be super helpful to entrepreneurs if we could take that away from them so they could be focusing on their core, which is building a business, not focusing on, office space or internet or coffee or whatever, desks. And so Brooks and I met Christopher Gergen, who was working on some community type of ideas. And then he knew this guy, Jason Wyden, who was just moving to the area, who had some real estate experience, who was like, Christopher was like, hey, you guys don't run this yourselves. Like, focus on your business. I've got this guy, Jason. He can help with the logistics of like making this happen. And so we had some extra space in Brooks's office that she wasn't using. And we opened up the first Raleigh Founded. And right when we opened, I think we opened and it was already full. And then with a waiting list. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, you do something and the market is immediately telling you there's a need. And then we expanded a year or two later into the warehouse district. And I think we opened full there as well.
Yeah.
And so it was just very clear.
Then you had to buy something next door. Then you've always it's always been chasing you versus you chasing it.
Yeah. And so that was kind of how it started. And we're still doing it today. We've got, I think, like 5 spaces now, over 100,000 square feet, like 400 companies.
Yeah. I remember when I first did the tweener list in 2015, I was like, why is there this explosion of startups? And then like the next year I figured out how to get it on Google Map and it clustered over the coworking.
Interesting.
And I was like, yeah. And it was like, duh. It was like the coworking definitely helped. Like, I don't know, it was a factor. I also credit like Shark Tank and the Social Network. Maybe a lot of things kind of like stacked up there to create an explosion of entrepreneurism.
And one of my goals, the other thing I saw at ShareFile was like how much impact a successful startup can have on the community. And so like the impact that we had on the warehouse district and all the jobs we created and all the people that we hired that made their way into other companies. So like one of the goals with Raleigh Founded, I stated early on, is we want to incubate the next ShareFile or the next multiple ShareFiles. And Pendo is actually a company that started in Raleigh Founded, and they give some credit to Raleigh Founded kind of for their early success. And so I feel like we have one of those, which is Pendo, and we've got some other ones that are doing really well. And Levitate,
should have taken stock instead of rent.
Yeah, we thought about it. We thought about the accelerator model versus
hindsight's 2020. So you do that as kind of like a side journey.
Yep.
And then your post Citrix, what led to Levitate?
I decided I was too young to retire. I realized I wanted to leave Citrix. I was 39. Felt like I was too young to retire. And I was like, well, I don't really think I want to be a corporate executive. I don't think I would be a good VC, and I don't think I would like to do that. And so kind of process of elimination, I was like, well, I did like to be an entrepreneur.
You haven't been totally positive on VC at this point in the conversation.
Exactly. So,
those guys ruin everything.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that.
And I just kind of felt like, I don't know if I'd be good at it. And also the lifestyle of looking at companies and deciding what to invest in just doesn't sound, that fun to me. And so kind of process of elimination, I decided like entrepreneurship is something that I know I enjoy. And so I decided I wanted to do another company. And one thing for me is like, I've never had a shortage of business ideas. So like I always had a notebook of ideas. And so like when I left Citrix, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I had like 20 ideas of things I could do. One of the filters I kind of put it through was I decided I wanted to do something where I was selling to similar customer types as ShareFile, because I figured I knew how to do that. I knew the people who knew how to do that kind of outbound SMB sales. And so I figured if I can pick one of my ideas that I have that are in that area, it will eliminate one of the big risks of distribution. And so, so now it's about just making sure that the product is the right fit for the market, but I know we can sell to these people. I know we can serve them. I know what they need. I know how to build products for them. The other kind of things that I was looking at, I was really interested in doing something with email and calendar systems and AI. And so, but I wanted to build an idea that could benefit from AI, but was not 100% dependent on AI, because it's easy to come up with an idea of, and this was 2017. So like, it's easy to come up with an idea of like, hey, we'll use AI to like do time tracking. So we automatically know where you're spending your time and you don't have to manually log it. Well, there's a huge amount of risk that the AI works and can actually do that. And so I wanted to make sure that the idea could still be successful without AI, but then could benefit from AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
and this is obviously like, a long time before GPTs were.
Exactly. This was 5 years before ChatGPT. So anyway, I kind of then got into this problem area, which is, which I saw Brooks struggle with a lot, which is like all these relationship-based businesses, they have Salesforce, they've got marketing automation, but a lot of the new business they generate, it comes totally outside of those systems with them just doing a good job keeping in touch in a more personal way with their network. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is like, can you use analytics from email and calendar to help people scale that process? Because most people know that they don't do a great job of keeping in touch with everybody who they want to be keeping in touch with. And the tools out there are not built for them. And so I figured the industries that I knew how to sell to, like financial advisors and lawyers and accountants and insurance people, they all fall in that category of word of mouth, personal, authentic, relationship-driven businesses versus kind of hardcore sales approach. And so decided to build Levitate.
So I think the original entity was Real Magic. Was that just kind of like another kind of an exploration platform before you kind of like zeroed in on what became Levitate? Or
yeah, my original idea with Real Magic, which is not totally dead now, is that, and this was the original idea of Novel Labs, and I've never been able to pull it off, but like your original idea with Novel Labs is incubate multiple products.
Kind of like a venture studio.
But,
but like a solo entrepreneur. Like
exactly.
Not
and then
having LPs or something.
And then what ended up happening is like ShareFile became successful, and then we could never do anything else because it didn't make sense. And then so for Real Magic, I kind of had the same idea, which is we'll launch multiple products over time. Levitate will be the first one, but we'll invest a certain amount of our revenue over time to launch like new products to keep growth going for longer. And again, we're kind of, maybe we'll end up in the same position. So I've always started wanting to build like a company that I can run for my whole life, like a Berkshire Hathaway platform, start new businesses, but keep the umbrella of, the company. And I have not yet been able to pull it off. We'll see if I can do it with Real Magic.
The context switching is very hard.
Yeah, the context switching is hard. I think the toughest part is also like having the discipline to invest in something that is not going to move the needle on the business once the business gets to a certain scale. Mm-hmm. And like, if the company is 25 million going to 50 million, trying a new product that's going to take maybe a couple or 3 years to get to 1 million, it's difficult to justify that.
Yeah.
But it's also necessary in the long term because eventually every product starts to slow. And if you don't have the next one scaling behind it, then you end up with kind of a growth problem that puts you in a kind of a death spiral as a business.
Yeah. Okay. So you started Levitate 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's this kind of keep in touch marketing. Mm-hmm. What are some of the verticals that you guys are in?
So we started in insurance, independent insurance agencies, and then we added wealth management, accounting, legal, nonprofit, and then now we're selling into home services as well, HVAC, plumbing, roofing. Mm-hmm.
And give us an idea of the scale. So you've been at this. So first of all, you decided to do VC this time. Why turn your stripes and become a evil VC background?
Yeah, originally I wasn't planning on it. So my original plan was I didn't feel like I could bootstrap again because it's just hard. I mean, at ShareFile, I waited till we had 1,000 customers before I hired any employees. So it was just me up to 1,000 customers. So I was basically working all the time. I was coding, doing the marketing, doing customer support. This was like early cloud days. So like I had to bring my laptop with me everywhere I went to dinner or whatever, because if I got a call that the site was down, it was going to be down until I fixed it. And so
I had to have when you're the only employee. Yeah.
I had to have a laptop with me like 24/7 for those first year or two. And I felt like, well, I'm like 40 now and I've got some money. I probably don't need to put myself through that. So I decided I'll hire a couple developers to start. I did start coding again. So I helped with the initial launch of Levitate. I coded some of it. But so once you hire a designer and a couple developers and then a few salespeople, you need money. And so my original idea was that Brooks and I would just put in a certain amount of seed capital, and that could get us to break even, and then I could kind of execute on my plan. What I realized after about a year was that we weren't going to be capital efficient enough to get to break even with like the capital that we were comfortable putting in, especially Brooks was comfortable putting in. And so like at some point she was like, all right, well, I'm not comfortable with us putting any more in at this stage. And so we had to either raise VC funding, or I probably would have had to shut the business down if I didn't do that.
I did one bootstrap and have done VC.
Yeah.
It's odd, but even though I'm older and more patient as a person, I'm less patient building companies. Because like once you've gotten up to a certain size, resetting at zero is just like, let's go faster.
Feels very slow. Yeah, exactly.
faster.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then give us an idea for how big Levitate is now.
So we have about 6,500 customers. We're about 25 million of ARR.
Awesome.
In scale. We have a couple hundred employees.
Yep. And still same model, lots of direct, lots of go-to-market that's BDRs, pounding the phones.
Yep.
Obviously digital marketing and that type of stuff.
Yeah. Same playbook basically. And I think we've evolved it and probably gotten even better at it than we were before. But yeah, it's pretty much the same exact playbook.
What keeps you motivated? So you could have retired and gone to a beach or whatever your thing is. Like, why do you keep doing this?
I think that like being an entrepreneur, I think requires some kind of like temporary suspension of disbelief. And so the time I made the decision, like not to retire and to do another company, and then I jumped into Levitate. Once you're jumped in, then you're kind of committed. And so like I probably spent a lot of time in the first couple of years being like, that was so stupid for me to do that. Why would I risk my reputation and like do this? Why didn't I just retire? Like now I've put myself in like this tough position. And if I fail, then everyone's going to just think I was lucky the first time. And like, and so after I made that entrepreneurial leap, I kind of had some periods of regret, for a
founder's
while.
remorse, time founder's remorse.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll have to brand that.
But it's kind of like, I did it because I thought too young to retire, which is probably true. And then once you're in it, and like you want to see it through and be successful. And so I'm in it at this point. It took us probably 5 years before I really felt we have product market fit. We have something that's not going to go to zero. And then now it's about like, how big can we build it? And like that path to 100 million plus in revenue. And I think it's actually now it's like a little bit more of a more fun time as a business. I think, at least for me, everybody's probably different, but the fear of existential failure for me is very strong. And so like when we were in our first few years and that was a very real possibility, I found it really stressful. And I think now we have something of value now. It may not be as much value as where we want it to be, but it's all very, very unlikely that it's going to go away.
Yeah.
And so this kind of scale up part of it, the 10 million to 100 million, I think in a lot of ways is, for me at least, is more fun.
Yeah. And you're 2x where you were with ShareFile. So you're in uncharted territory, which is fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're finally off the map, right?
Yeah.
And oddly, you'll find that the path from 25 to 100 is easier to see and navigate than the path from 0 to 5. Like the product market fit's the hardest part, and then like it's a very strange, super counterintuitive part of this whole thing.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's kind of like the product market fit's almost like a lightning in a bottle type of a thing. It's more of an art than a science, and then the scaling is more science.
Just good, like just grind it out. There's no other path through. I've seen you guys do some events with like, once you get to your size, you're kind of in this like potential IPO kind of company, and the both the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ start courting you.
Yeah.
So I've seen you guys do the NASDAQ market site. Is that you just like, that's just kind of like a fun thing, or is that kind of, do you have aspirations to do an IPO? Would you ever think about doing that?
I would definitely think about it. I think when I founded the company, when I first founded the company, the goal was to never IPO and to be like a SaaS, and just run a closely held business for the rest of my career. But then I think I kind of changed once we decided to take VC funding. That's not really practical as much. And
the lifestyle business is off the table.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you still have fail on the table. But
right.
This one's off, and now it's like M&A or IPO.
Yeah.
So you've got basically 3 choices.
And so I think IPO was really interesting. And at the time, this was 5 years ago, the conventional wisdom was like, if you get to 100 million, you can IPO. The yardstick has kind of moved now, and people are talking more 250, 300, 500. It's that may shift back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would. I think it would be also great for the area. There's in the Triangle right now. There's no independent public software as a service businesses, and so I would love to kind of see 1 or 2 of those happen in the Triangle, and rather than just be on the sidelines saying I want that to happen, like I can be one of those, and so I think it would be really great for the area to do it.
Yeah, I'm 1,000% aligned on that, and I think everyone's cheering for you guys. Yeah, we got to get Pindo out, got to get you guys out, and then I think those would be like huge wins for the area. Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about the area is we have something that I think less than 5 markets have, which is 3 $10 billion market cap businesses. We don't get enough credit for that with Red Hat, SaaS, and Epic Games. There's a lot of huge markets. I don't think LA has 3 $10 billion software businesses. There's less than 5 markets out there that probably do. And then we have all these great activity on the tweener side. And we have this gigantic gap in the middle. And so I think that's the big area where the Triangle, not having any public SaaS companies, there's not that many public SaaS companies. There's probably 100. I mean, it fits on 2 pages of paper. It's going down because they're getting, So ChannelAdvisor got bought by private equity. So there's more of it coming off than coming on for sure. So basically, if you're a public SaaS company, you're known because there's just not that many of them. And so kind of filling that middle of the pipeline is the biggest challenge for the Triangle. Get those tweeners into the public markets. 100% on board with that. Thank you very much for doing this. Appreciate it. Absolutely. My pleasure.
Great to hear all the stories. And I've known pieces of it, but it was cool to hear all the chronological order.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Jess.
For more tweener content, check out the Triangle Tweener Times Substack at tweener.substack.com. For more tweener content, check out tweenertimes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Triangle Tweener Talks.